August 1946, Street. Michael and All Angels Church, Downton Abbey. How many people had Thomas seen in this church, getting married, getting christened, getting buried? As the vicar spoke, funerals, weddings, baptisms filled his head. A comforting list, to take his mind from the fact that Milo lay in a box at the front of the church. Words being said about her, from Lady Mary, from Master George, from himself. Thomas looked out upon the rows of faces, all waiting for him to say something, anything, that would make them all feel better. Branson had gone, their lives had been torn apart, and somehow, Milo was in the very center of everything. So Thomas spoke about her brilliance, about her insight and her determination to be a physicist, how she had never done anything to anyone on purpose, how she was always trying to do the right thing, how his marriage to her had made him what he was that day, ultimately, a father. And the memorial for the two Downton heirs, Patrick and James, had been there, as had been Lady Mary and Matthew's wedding, and George's christening. Thomas's mind trailed off as Reverend Travers placed a hand on his shoulder and gestured towards his seat, as he spoke words that were Christian, about being at peace and that her body was left behind, but her mind, her spirit had moved on. How true was that? Thomas hoped so. He was not one for church, for religion. He believed there was a God, somewhere out there. It was a comfort to think that the being that had once been Melusina would go on, somewhere. Milo was happy here, said a voice behind Thomas, as the coffin was taken outside, after she had been buried. It was Mr. Melsley. Beside her his wife, once Miss Baxter. Melsley laid a hand on his shoulder. But, it was to Ernest he was speaking. I had the privilege of knowing your mother, Ernest, he told the boy. And she was a singular lady. What she did for you, for Mr. Barrow, for the family. Thank you, Mr. Melsley, Ernest replied, politely. My only regret is that I didn't know her for very long. And, very soon, all of the congregation came to pass on their condolences, to Ernest and to Thomas, which made Thomas feel that he could not face the cold buffet that Mrs. Batemore and Daisy had prepared before they left. At Downton the family drove back, but most people walked, in the warmth of the summer day. And after the food, when Thomas was standing in the garden, the tightness of the black band on his left arm feeling as if it were crushing the life from him, the fountain spurted and trickled as it had always done. Today, Milo was not there to see it. I came here before, came a voice behind Thomas. Hen Ashby read her brother's work. The man was big-framed, and wore a trilby. Thomas did not recognize him, but he put out his hand. Forgive me, Thomas told him. I do not know your name. Cockcroft, the man murmured. Dr. John Cockcroft. Thomas did recognize the name, and perhaps had met the man before. I believe you worked with Professor Rutherford? He asked. The man guffawed, and clapped Thomas on the shoulder. Indeed, he told him. Oh, that seems like a very long time ago. Yes, he added, I do remember here. It was a warm day, early summer. Ah, he added, as a woman approached, hailing Cockcroft with a brief wave. There is someone I would like you to meet, Cockcroft told Thomas. As he looked, he saw a small, slight woman, dressed on a black dress, one which looked as if it had come from 40 years before, high-necked, long-sleeved, low-hemmed. I was surprised to be invited here, the woman told Thomas. I imagined this building from her letters. Letters? Thomas asked. From dear Melusina, the woman told him, and held out a hand. She saved my life, you know. Thomas took the hand, but frowned. Begging your pardon, who are you? He asked, not in the mood for manners. Meitner, said the woman, who was clearly not in the mood for manners either. Elise Meitner. Melusina and I corresponded for the longest time, and I responded to her last letter, and we finally met, on the border of Germany and Holland. Cockcroft, she added, nodding to him. Then turning to Thomas, shall we walk? She stood on the platform for me, waiting, across the border. There were guards, they were strolling around, bored. Not looking for a fleeing physicist. I had fled Berlin, packed up a lot of my belongings. But I would have been, had I not abandoned my bags. I took with me one small handbag, and crossed right past those guards, and they never stopped me. Lucina saw me, and crossed the platform, took my bag. I walked to freedom that day, Mr. Barrow, Dr. Meitner told Thomas, as they passed the formal gardens and headed towards the woods. The guards, you see, thought we were ditzy girlfriends gigging over something or other. She drove to where Otto was hiding, my nephew, Friss. Then we, Otto and I, escaped to Denmark thanks to Boa, then to Sweden and finally England. I meant to thank her. I am sorry I was too late. You made the effort to come, Dr. Meitner, Thomas told her. And what else are funerals for? Not for the dead, they are already past. They are for the living. He turned back and looked at the 200 people eating and drinking in Milo's memory. It had been Milo who had said that to him, too. She was expecting a child, Meitner continued, as they skirted past the ornamental pond. That would be Ernest, Thomas added, pointing in his son's direction. The old woman stopped, and squinted. He lives? Oh, I did wonder, Meitner told Thomas. She had such a time with Heisenberg, friends for so many years. And then, she told me, he had been arrested. I expect they were both scared. Germany was a wicked place to be a decade ago, she added. I cannot blame people taking comfort where they can. And then she went with me to Boa, hoping to stay there for her duration. But, alas, Mrs. Boa would not hear of it. She caught a boat back to Germany, and stayed in the first town she came to. Wilhelmshaven, Thomas told her, as they approached Cockcroft. That was where she stopped until she had had Ernest. And, because he could take it no longer, he called for his son, and nodded to the 2 physicists. Ernest, there are 2 people I would like you to meet. Ernest, polite as ever, extended a hand to both Meitner and Cockcroft, at which, Elise Meitner bent her head, and peered at him. My, you do look like your father, she told him. Come, I think we have a lot to discuss. 88,888,888. Before everyone had left Downton Abbey from Milo's funeral luncheon, Thomas walked away from the house and over the fields to the Ashby cottage. He hadn't been here since before the police report of an intruder, the day Milo had turned up. The front door was not locked, and Thomas reached around to switch on the light, which still worked. Milo had been here, Thomas knew. She had spent many months here before she could hold out no longer. Had she known she was dying then, when she had made the decision to come back to Downton? He felt to his pocket. It was always there, the watch that Milo had insisted Henry, his brother, meant for him, reassembled from the dial upwards. And he had, too. Milo had a way of being single-minded. Tidy living room, tidy kitchen, Thomas thought. It just needed someone to be here, make the dormant house into one with some life. Ernest, Thomas thought. He would offer the boy the house for, well, whatever he wanted to do with it. Do you wish to find your father? Thomas had asked him once, to say hello. So he knows you? But Ernest had shaken his head. Mother once told me all about his indifference, Ernest had replied. How the work was for work's sake, how he was accepting of the fact his country would win the war. HB she called him. Thomas breathed now, coughed the cough of a lifelong smoker. Werner Heisenberg and Ernest, who had followed him over the fields, gave a knock on the door. Werner Heisenberg, Ernest repeated, striding over to Thomas. He is nothing in my life, father, he told Thomas, and reached for Thomas's hand. Apart from Mr. Skoltz, his adopted father in Germany, Ernest recognized only Thomas Barrow as his true father. If that is what you wish, Thomas told him. And he told Ernest about the cottage, and made the offer, which Ernest had accepted. Milo lived here, before she came up to Downton in June, Thomas told Ernest. And they found her small collection of possessions in the cellar, by her bed, and they took it all up into the yard and looked through them. And Thomas told Ernest about each one, about the copper wire, which had been her life at Downton when she was a child, and a grey rock streaked with a gold-coloured mineral which Thomas guessed to be a piece of pitchblende and, had he known, should have given to Chadwick, who was still carrying out a survey of Downton Abbey for sources of radioactivity. There was the small device, a coil of wire and a magnet, which was her radio transmitter, and he told Ernest about when she had made one, and given another to Lady Rose. 2 soup spoons from a cutlery service Downton no longer used because, well, they were missing 2 soup spoons. Ernest held up a piece of string, with 2 knots in, one at 6 inches, the other at a foot, which Milo was never without, and there was a calling card of Martha Levinson, and he recalled to Ernest about the woman visiting, and putting the Dowager's nose out of joint. Last of all, Thomas held up chain and watch that he had made himself, so she could use it in the laboratory. He told her, before his hand landed on the opal necklace he had given to her, and had been repaired in London at Lady Mary's expense, after Tom Branson had begun to pursue his claim to his title through Milo and some apple seeds.